Oh good, you're here. Have a seat. The higher-ups called, and they told me you have to go through this item hoarding rehabilitation course. Look, I get it. You work hard to find all these obscure items, and maybe even see some of them as collectibles or mementos of your adventure. Maybe you're just saving them in case you need them later, right? I just want to say it's not your fault that you're an item hoarder, and we're here to support you. By we, I mean me. Not only is it not your fault, but I think consumables might unintentionally trigger a few unwanted behaviors in your brain. So, I prepared a presentation to define and explain why item hoarding is a problem, why you might be an item hoarder, and some of the ways that you and developers can work together on it. Item hoarding is the tendency for players to hold on to consumable items, typically in fear that premature use of the item will be wasteful. Symptoms of item hoarding include over-encumbrance, finding bosses increasingly difficult, and a feeling of regret when finishing a game without using your potions, such as the potion of turning you into a god of lightning you were holding on to for a special occasion. Are you or someone you know an item hoarder? There's help available at 1-800-USE. So, item hoarding is a problem for you for a couple of reasons. Point 1. You feel like you missed out on the fun you could have had if you used your items at the right time. Point 2. Not using them can throw off the game's balance, since consumables are usually considered when making the challenge. Don't use them and the fights are harder, or use all of them and the fight's too easy. Point 3. If the game is designed without unlimited storage space, you're constantly taking time and making decisions about what to keep. If that's not intended as part of the game's design or challenge, that's not fun, and anything you throw out feels like a loss. Point 4. Unlimited storage space can even be a problem if there's a large amount of items, since you'll spend more time sifting through them than using them. Especially if you try to optimize the game's economy by picking up every fancy-looking piece of silverware with the intent on selling it later. Point 5. This one extends a bit further, but if you feel like you finished a fight and used an item that you didn't actually need to use, or a party member died when you feel like you could have kept them up, you might restart the fight or reload an older save. Restarting the fight wastes your time and mental energy on something unnecessary due to loss aversion, which I'll get into in a minute. A classic example of this is Ether in Pokemon, which I'm guilty of hoarding. In the mainline Pokemon games, each of your Pokemon's attacks have a limited use. They are power points. You can restore power points at Pokecenters, but if you run out while in the field, you can use one of these Ether items. As a kid, I didn't know about any methods of finding more Ethers, so I never used them, even when my main hitter ran out of attacks. So, why are you an item hoarder? There's a couple of reasons off the top of my head that I can think of. Some people are just naturally inclined to want to collect items. I don't think this is an inherently bad thing, and could even be encouraged depending on the type of game. Some players also don't use items intentionally as a pride thing, since items are usually designed to make certain things easier. I think the problem occurs when it's not the desired play pattern. A lot of consumables are designed to be, well, consumed. They give a temporary power boost to the player, and usually to help overcome the odds imposed by a challenge, or sporadic bouts of bad luck, as I am vulnerable to. But I think there's a main psychological factor to why you're afraid to use items, is loss aversion. There's an obvious fear or loss aversion that something you have will be needed later or more valuable in the future. This also applies to games with economies like MMOs. MMOs in particular usually feature gear that benefits only a certain class or playstyle. So when a player finds an item that doesn't fit their playstyle, they might find themselves holding on to it in case another player wants it, or eventually to try a new class, or in case it becomes a valuable crafting ingredient for a future recipe. You might also be greedy. It's not a moral failing, just a natural consequence of resource optimization. Like I mentioned before, if you want to optimize a game's economy, you're encouraged to try and pick up and sell as many things as possible. A common way to handle this is using an encumbrance system, but that means as long as the player can pick up and move items, they will. See me or anyone else hauling back entire houses worth of items in Baldur's Gate and Divinity Original Sin 2, or the gold bars in Fallout New Vegas, is DLC Dead Money. I mean, the moral lesson of Dead Money is that you have to know when to let go, right? But players will find a way to haul the gold bars out of there anyways. Finally, this reason isn't really your fault. You were taught that some items were important. For example, I've been playing through a tactical RPG called The Dungeon of Nahelbeck. It's got a lot of flaws and quirks, but has been satisfying my craving for a tactical RPG. Early on, it's established that the misc items you pick up with no other purpose than being sold are sometimes used as the answer for a riddle by choosing it out of your inventory. Suddenly now every item you pick up might be required to solve a puzzle. Luckily there's a buyback system and most of the game is accessible, like you can go back to it even if you unlocked future areas. but I find it's easier to solve the riddle when you can compare it to each item and their description. Even worse, if you were taught that those items weren't important and got rid of them in a location that you can't go back to or have to grind to get them again, you're gonna develop trust issues. Alright, so now we know why it's an issue and why you might be an item hoarder, but I did say the faults was shared between you and developers, so let's look at some of the ways that games developers can work around your inclination. The issue that developers who care about player fun face is that to maximize fun, they should allow for player autonomy and reward fun play patterns. But players, given the choice, will try to optimize their experience. I mean, hey, maybe loading up on random junk and moving across the map at 20% movement speed is fun for you, but I think most players would rather take the gold and move on. I think adding encumbrance encourages a lot of backtracking and slow treks with items that might not even been worth it compared to how much gold you could have made just by progressing in the game. On player autonomy, RPG players generally want to make decisions that impact their character or the game world. In limited inventory systems, this could mean that the player has to choose which resources they want to take with them. This doesn't mean the player should have control over every tiny decision though. Limiting a player's options can actually be a good thing at times, since some players are prone to analysis paralysis, they call it. Too many options can be overwhelming or cause anxiety, compared to fewer options but meaningful choices. Like if a fire resistance potion should be used now against a devil you're fighting, or if you should save it in case you run into a dragon. But arbitrarily restricting a player's ability to hold on to items can cause frustration to those who like having options. Instead, I think consumable use should be encouraged holistically through mechanisms in the game designed to benefit the player. The best way I can think to fight your inclination to hoard consumables is to make them somehow reusable. If you know you can get more, you're more willing to use it. You can do this in a couple of ways, and each of them have their own use case in different games. The first way is to make the items limited use, but rechargeable, like Estus flasks in Dark Souls. You only have so many charges available to you at once, but since you know you'll be able to get them back the next time you rest at a checkpoint or die, there's no loss aversion to using them, and it poses an interesting choice to the player about when and where to use them. The second way is to make them unlimited use, but with a timer, which we call a cooldown. Again, this encourages the player to use it when it's available, but gives the player the challenge of timing its use correctly. The last way you can work around this, if neither of those options work, is to make sure the player knows that they can get more of the item, whether that's through respawning crafting ingredients or at a shop. I definitely lean more towards the shop though, since players will gravitate towards getting items quickly rather than needing to farm for them, which might take a fair amount of time. It's also good if items can be bought back in case it was sold accidentally or the player needs it later. If you don't want to make items getting trivial, like just spending gold at a shop, or if you can get more gold in the game, then let the player know that they will be able to get more of the item later in the game, like how ashes and bell bearings are handled in Dark Souls and Elden Ring. Ashes and bell bearings are special items found in the world after progressing in the game, and when returned to the shop, they expand the shop's inventory, so you can actually include more items in the shop like that. The next way to encourage players to use items is actively rewarding them for doing it. I haven't played it, but I heard in Ratchet & Clank 2016 you have to craft your ammo, but you level up your guns based on the damage dealt. So the player's encouraged to actually use that ammo if they want to get stronger. Compare that to something like a temporary power boost. You won't want to use it if there's a chance you'll need it later, but if you get stronger every time you use it, you're rewarded for actually using it. You could even allow the player to choose between the temporary strong and permanent weak boosts, which caters to both playstyles. It's game dependent, but games can also be built around limited use items. For example, in the game Going Under, all the weapons in the game have like 2 to 15 hits, and afterwards they break, and you're constantly scavenging around for new weapons. So even though you can use your fists and save your best weapons for boss fights, you're usually fighting with whatever you find in the room. Going back to a previous example I made, I wouldn't have been so hesitant to throw out items if I knew they weren't necessary for quests. So it would be best for everyone involved if items that were only in the game to be sold were tagged as such or had some sort of indicator. Dave the Diver does this with some of their items by saying they'll fetch a high price with the main merchant. If you really do want to have junk items in your game only meant to be sold, definitely keep them in their own MISC tab like Cyberpunk and allow the player to bulk sell them with a peace of mind knowing they're not useful for anything else. I've read some suggestions online that suggest merchants should not buy things like junk items or spare gear, but at that point, just drop more gold and don't include them at all. This next point is directly for the game developers. Consider having items that scale with the player. Using flat numbers, especially for things like health potions, will fall off later in the game and will usually be upstaged by your mega health potions. Instead, consider how you can incorporate percentages. If your character starts with 10 HP, a health potion that recovers 5 HP might be pretty good, but near useless when your character has 100 HP. But a potion that recovers 30% of your HP will be alright when you have 10 HP max, and still alright when you have 100 HP. You do need to be a little careful about this though, since progression is a bit less rewarding with this system. A 40 to 50% HP restored increase doesn't feel anywhere near as meaningful as a 5 to 500 HP recovering potion. Another option is to allow weaker potions to be combined into stronger ones later into gameplay, so the items will scale with the player. Players also like new items and would rather swap to a weapon with the same stats as the upgraded version of your first weapon. I haven't looked into this too much, but have seen it related to terms like novelty bias or neophilia, the human desire for novel experiences, or maybe it gives them a mental break from their old item and just subjectively feels better to use. Circling back to encumbrance systems, they're a band-aid that can force the player to use their items. This can either be a weight system where the items are unlimited except for their weight value until they reach a threshold, or a slot system where items take up 1 to any number of slots, where you can have a certain number that can be filled. Storage capacity works well if for some reason they can't acquire new items until the old ones are used. Maybe you can get some ideas from that. There could be a hard cap on certain items, or you could also take the Resident Evil or survival horror type approach where your inventory is very limited. You're literally forced to only take what can fit into your bag. This encourages careful planning and using items to make more space. This can also be extended into losing your inventory. If you know that you might not be able to use your items on a different level, or if you die when you lose them like in a roguelike, then you're much more inclined to use them to stay alive for as long as possible. Going back to the game, The Dungeon of Naheulbeuk, it's a tactical RPG where you control 8 characters at once. Every character has 2 action pips, but your options are either move and attack, move and use an item, or move twice. Since using a consumable eats up your attack, it's significantly more difficult to use them instead of just attacking and killing the enemies faster. I only used health potions to get downed characters back up before they were out of combat. So here it's an issue of not being able to use items. When some other games, you just don't need to use them since your character is overwhelmingly more powerful, like in a lot of Bethesda RPGs. If you have free options like skills that can do what a consumable does, you'll use your free options instead, like waiting a minute for your HP to regenerate instead of using a health potion. But obviously, consumables can be a good supplement during combat or something where you don't have time to regenerate health. The last solution is probably the least intuitive and most difficult to implement, but balance it for the player. If the player is gaining gold too quickly and not using as many resources, give your enemies more health, more damage. Are they struggling? Throw in some extra freebie potions. You can even add resource sinks that constantly need to be filled so that players are at least required to use the items, like food or any kind of resource bar. As a bonus, if the player actually knows what items are worth holding on to, like to repair the community center in Stardew Valley, then they have a goal to work towards and a reason to use them. I do try and keep it a bit nuanced on this channel, so in this last section there's an additional few points I want to make. Is item hoarding necessarily a bad thing? Of course not. Like I said, you can use items as progress indicators and have a collection by the end to look back on, or use them as a completion percentage. You can also neglect items as a self-imposed difficulty if you find the game too easy. I've done this myself unintentionally. But using consumables can make the game or other self-imposed challenges much more fun. I played through Divinity Original Sin 2 with my girlfriend as custom characters and no other members in our party. Usually have a party of 4, but as a party of 2, I had to utilize some of the crazy items available to overcome our action economy's disadvantage. And you know what? I think I had more fun since my character felt so much more powerful, and it was more rewarding to actually finish some of the harder fights by the skin of our teeth. If you find yourself not having fun and regretting not using items, the best way around that is to recognize it and actually start using them. Do you need some healing? Drink that potion, brother. Do you want to get past this boss a little faster? Use that potion of bottled lightning, and I think you'll have more fun doing it. Maybe some future developers will be inspired by this video and work with your behaviors instead of against them. Alright class, what did we learn today? Item hoarding is the tendency to hold onto items until the end of the game. Holding onto them can feel bad since the game might be harder and you don't get to feel as powerful. You can learn to use items by recognizing your loss aversion and actually using the darn thing. If desired, developers can encourage you to use items by rewarding you for using them or making them more available. Now get out of here, I have to prepare for Serial Project Starters 101. Hey, thanks for watching the full video. I don't usually ask for subscribers since I think it's tacky and hurts retention, but you did make it to the end. More importantly though, it's my first time trying to make a video in this style, and your interaction and support lets me know to make more videos like this, which I hope you want to see more of. I was only kind of familiar with Blockbench, which is the software I used to make this model, and I was only kind of familiar with Blender and had only done a small handful of animations for games, but here we are. If you did want to hear more of my thoughts on game design and game psychology, there should be a playlist on the screen. Thanks, I'll see you around.